Be Hero presents Sheroes.
Hi everyone, Alicia here,
And Amy.
and we are asking the so-called heroes to step aside for a moment so we can give the Sheroes their turn in the spotlight.
Yes, you heard right. Welcome to Sheroes, a podcast by Be Hero Media.
So just sit back, because it's time for the real game changers to show you how it's done.
January 1st, 1863, Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring all enslaved persons in the Confederate States free. Despite this, it would take another 2 years before the Confederates would surrender. 2 months after their surrender, there were still Black Americans enslaved in Texas, and it wasn't until June 19, 1865, or Juneteenth, that Union Major General George Granger came to Galveston, Texas, and took control of 2,000 troops, that the enslaved people of Texas were finally able to peacefully be released from bondage.
I wouldn't say that we understand what it was like for Black Americans during this time, nor can I say that we understand their struggles now, but I think it's important that we learn about them and acknowledge the past and present, and do our best to understand their struggles and the struggles of all minorities, so that as one people we can make the best decisions for everyone.
This week, in honor of Juneteenth last Saturday, we chose one of the abolitionists that was active prior to, during, and after the Civil War. Her name was Frances E.W. Harper. Along with some of the more famous abolitionists like Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, and Frederick Douglass, Frances Harper was also actively traveling throughout the U.S. and Canada, lecturing on abolition. And while she is not as widely known today, she would have been very well known during the time that she was living.
She was born in Baltimore, Maryland, in 1825 as a free African American in a slave state. After her parents died at the young age of 3, she was raised by her maternal aunt and uncle, who gave her their last name, and because her uncle was both an educated minister in the Episcopal Church and an active abolitionist, she grew up educated and followed the influence of her uncle and became an abolitionist herself.
Now seems like as good a moment as any to give a shout out to the fathers for Father's Day last Sunday. From what I've learned about her uncle, he was a great role model and perhaps kind of like a father figure to her growing up. So to all of you fathers out there, or even men raising children that aren't your own, but you're doing the best for your families and children, we hope that you had a special Father's Day.
Coming back to our topic, in her lifetime, Frances lived to see her home state enforce a horrible law stating that any free African Americans that entered the state would be imprisoned and sold into slavery. This was a major life event that certainly impacted her drive for fighting for the abolition of slavery. Despite seeing this terrible law come into play in her lifetime, she also lived to later see slavery abolished in her own state and in the United States. She did not live to see the day that women gained the right to vote, but she fought for it.
Growing up, she attended Watkins Academy, which was established by her uncle. She attended this... I'm going to try that again. Okay, round 3. She attended the school until she turned 13. At that age, like most girls her age, she started working as a nursemaid and a seamstress for a white family that owned a bookshop.
Now, we say most girls her age, but I wonder if that means all young girls or just African American girls. That seems rather young to be working, but it was more than 100 years ago. Maybe that was normal for all young girls.
Yeah, I think it was probably fairly normal. I think it's more of a modern idea to have kids not working.
I wonder if it's more of a poverty thing.
That could be. There are a lot of books that talk about like child workers from many countries and cultures, so I think you're right. It probably does have more to do with poverty than age.
I think the word you were looking for was child labor.
Yes, that is the word I was looking for. Thanks. As for her experience working in a bookshop, both as a nursemaid and seamstress, I haven't found information to describe what her experience was like with her job, but we know that she was able to read these books, and I can't remember where I found it, but I thought that I'd read that these books really sparked her imagination. Again, I could be remembering it wrong. It might have been more about having access to such a vast array of books that she was able to further her own education.
She was exceptionally educated. At 21, she wrote her first volume of poetry called Forest Leaves. It might also be called Autumn Leaves. She moved to Ohio and taught at Union Seminary. Today, we would probably call the skills she taught homemaker skills.
As long as we're talking about homemaking skills, did you pass home ec in junior high?
Yes. Yes, I did.
I don't know to what extent she was involved in the abolitionist cause before her home state passed that devastating law banning free African Americans from entering the state, which meant that she couldn't go home. But after the law was passed, she became very active as an abolitionist.
She played a role in the abolitionist efforts in both USA and Canada. With her education, she was hired to go on tours throughout both countries, lecturing on anti-slavery. Her travels became her inspiration for many of her poems, short stories, and novels. Her writing focused on racism, feminism, and classism.
In 1860, she married Fenton Harper, and for a time she settled down from her political activity. However, after the death of her husband 4 years later, she resumed her political activities, including her abolitionist work. Interestingly, she did keep her husband's last name. In one book that I read, it suggested this could be because an unmarried woman was not taken as seriously as a married woman. Do you think it's still true today that married women are taken more seriously than unmarried women?
I kind of feel like it's the opposite. I mean, I feel like married women in the workplace they're not usually given as many promotions.
Yeah, I think that's true.
In 1866, she spoke at the National Women's Rights Convention in New York, and she urged those attending to include African American women in their fight for women's rights. She was met with some success, as the very next day a meeting was held to organize the American Equal Rights Association to work for the rights of African Americans and women. She was also the first, or one of the first, African Americans to be published in the United States.
Yeah, I think she is generally recognized as the first published African American author.
With several other abolitionist women, notably Harriet Tubman and Ida Wells Barnett, she co-founded the National Association of Colored Women.
She was actively engaged in several other community organizations, such as the Philadelphia and Pennsylvania Women's Christian Temperance Union, American Women's Suffrage Association, and the American Association of Colored Youth.
We would like to recognize Frances Harper in honor of Juneteenth because of all the work she put into freeing all black slaves and all of her other civil rights work.
As someone fighting for abolition, fighting for women's rights and education, and also a published author of several poems and works of fiction, she is an example we can look to for getting involved in the community and being a positive force for change. So we didn't really put this in the section about her story up earlier, but it's really hard to express just how involved she was in this abolitionist movement as well as the civil rights movement. As I was studying about this, I learned about some other abolitionists. One named John Brown, he was more of a militant abolitionist, and he led several attacks to get both weapons and free enslaved people. On one of his rebellions, he ended up getting captured and tried for treason and executed. And it just is interesting to me because Francis knew the family and comforted his wife after his execution. And she knew many of the abolitionists from her time.
Another story we wanted to mention, at least 100 years before Rosa Parks, Frances had her own story. In her story, it is with a city car. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but it was some type of public transportation. We wanted to quote her directly on this experience. Now let me tell you about Pennsylvania. I have been traveling nearly 4 years and have been in every New England state, in New York, Canada, and Ohio. But of all these places, This is about the meanest of all as far as the treatment of colored people is concerned. I have been insulted in several railroad cars. The other day, in attempting to ride in one of those city cars, after I had entered, the conductor came to me and wanted me to go out on the platform. Now, was not that brave and noble? As a matter of course, I did not. Someone interfered and asked or requested that I might be permitted to sit in a corner. I did not move, but kept the same seat. When I was about to leave, he refused my money, and I threw it down on the car floor and got out, after I had ridden it as far as I wished. She further said, I have met, of course, with kindness among individuals and families. All is not dark in Pennsylvania, but the shadow of slavery, oh, how drearily it hangs.
I've never heard that story before. It makes you wonder how many others had experiences like hers, but were never told.
I'm sure it wasn't an uncommon thing to happen.
As we mentioned before, she is generally recognized as the first published African-American author. So we wanted to just mention some of her different books that she's written. We're not listing all of them because there are a lot, but we wanted to list a few. And they deal with themes of racism, feminism, classism, slavery, and civil rights. So these books are Iola Eden, that's probably the most famous of her works. Minnie's Sacrifice, Poems on Miscellaneous Subjects, Sketches of Southern Life, Poems. Didn't know that was the title of one of them. The Martyr of Alabama and Other Poems, The Sparrow's Fall and Other Poems, and Atlanta Offer.
Some particular ones I would like to draw attention to are The Slave Mother, Bury Me in a Free Land, and On Learning to Read. I'm not sure where these three fall in her works of poetry, but they're easy to find online, and they're really powerful. The Slave Mother is particularly heartbreaking and offers devastating insight to what life was like for slave mothers.
Now, we have quite a few sources for this episode, so we're going to put them in, basically in, like, the little comment section. Is that what you call it in the episode?
Description? I don't know.
Description. There we go. But I'll just generally say where we got them and then check the comment or the about section for more details. So some of the sources are womenshistory.org, britannica.com, biography.com, poetryfoundation.org, wikipedia.org. It looks like we had two for biography.com, and as well the book Frances E.W. Harper, A Call to Conscience. There were also two other books that I haven't had a chance to read yet, mainly because they're not available on Kindle, but they probably are going to be great sources to look at. And if you've read them, we'd love for you to give us your feedback in the comments. But one of them is A Brighter Coming Day, a Frances Ellen Watkins Harper reader by Frances Smith Foster, and Discarded Legacy, Politics and Poetics in the Life of Frances E.W. Harper, 1825 to 1911, by Dr. Melba Joyce Boyd.
And the source we quoted about her city car experience was extracts from a letter of Frances Ellen Watkins in the Liberator, a newspaper. It was published on April 23rd, 1858, and it was retrieved April 30th, 2019. We hope you enjoyed our show. Please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share.
And to women and girls the world over,
be brave.